No, this is not a traditional Wire reaction video. This isn't even a review of Season 3. I just wanted to talk about something that stuck with me, and I should have recorded this video probably a long time ago, but I'm a habitual procrastinator. You sit down, and you get ready to push record, next thing you know, there's someone at the door. What I wanted to talk about is the end of The Wire Season 3. In particular, Carcetti as a character and his final speech, because I feel like it epitomizes the evergreen nature of this show. I think his speech might be the most fascinating, albeit unintentionally, in the season because of how it tests the audience, and it certainly tested me. Maybe it didn't test you. But the first time I watched Carcetti talk about how we turned our backs on West Baltimore, I didn't think about how, and I put a comment about how when he used the word war, among other things, it really undermined anything he could say after that, the good he may want to do to reference, and it intentionally does this, to reference Bunny episodes prior. You call something a war, and pretty soon everyone is going to be running around acting like warriors. I'm not going to be drawing parallels between the war on drugs and the war on terror in this video because I've talked about that before, and it's the most obvious thing that the season does, or the series does. In that final speech that he gives, he's ultimately just pandering, which feels blatantly obvious now considering nothing he said provided a solution. I struggled a lot this season with his character because I kept seeing Littlefinger. Obviously, I watched Game of Thrones before I watched The Wire, and sometimes I would read comments that are like, don't do that. Try and fight the urge to compare him to that character. But he is Littlefinger here. Even if he is well-intentioned, sometimes I still don't know how I feel about him as a character, and that's the whole point. His rousing speech is hot air, but at the beginning of the speech, he does talk about how we or they turned their backs on West Baltimore, the streets. And in that sense, part of what he's saying isn't untrue, but then as it goes on, you realize he really isn't saying anything. It's just the same sort of BS we always fall for, polished political rhetoric, even though it's seemingly off the cuff, which is the norm these days. Polished isn't even the right word these days. Whatever it is that's being said is still crafted to stir emotion, but ultimately say very little. But it works, not just in universe where the press and political elites eat that shit up, but on us, the audience. I somewhat fell for it, and I've read comments that a lot of viewers did also, and then that the creators of The Wire regretted that. But I think it makes the scene even more brilliant, even if it's unintentional, because it becomes this deeply uncomfortable litmus test, even though that term's probably unfair, IQ test. That being said, sometimes it does feel like people watch The Wire reactions simply to judge the intelligence of others and then try to flex their own. I don't think the first time around watching the show it's about catching everything. I know the Wire fan base loves to say all the details matter, and of course they do, but I think there's more value in thematic discussion. But I'd be lying if I said in a moment of weakness I didn't delete or cut out a part of my reaction where I started wooing after he said we turned our back on the streets of West Baltimore. And some of you probably saw that when you first watched my reaction. I edited out, after the fact in YouTube Studio just because I'm a pussy and I didn't want to be fooled in perpetuity on the internet, but I kind of was. I'd be lying if I said there wasn't even a part of me now that's just making this video to be like, hey, I get it. I don't even know what I was saying in the reaction. Clearly just very conflicted and confused about all the platitudes. I love a good platitude. But I guess watching season 3, and this is why I reacted the way I did initially, I was rooting for Carcetti's arc and not really listening to what he was saying, because I was conflicted about him at first, and then I wanted to believe in him, especially after he meets up with Bunny in a scene that had sincerity in it. I think I convinced myself that he was on this trajectory towards becoming the kind of politician we can finally believe in. Much like McNulty, who by the end of season 3 seems to become the kind of cop we can believe in, or at least a better kind of cop compared to who or what he's been. And the show lets us walk right into that trap. And I've talked a lot before about how this show may not be nihilistic, but it's not going to give you a happy ending or even necessarily a satisfying arc. Although I do find a lot of these arcs very satisfying. Carcetti's doesn't seem to be one in that same vein. And that's the genius of his speech. We fall for speeches like that all the time. We attach our own hopes, desires, and perspectives to political figures, and then we project those hopes onto their words, even when the words themselves are empty. I'm going to reference something that's not going to make sense to a lot of people, but it will to some. The more I think about his speech, the more it reminds me of Sam Wilson's speech at the end of Falcon and the Winter Soldier, the Disney Plus Marvel show, where he tells the senator that he needs to do better. You need to do better, Senator. And it's meant to be inspiring in that show. But if you stop and ask yourself, what does that actually even mean? The whole thing starts to crumble. The irony there, and I think it's a good representation of how much writing in contemporary media has fallen off, is that that moment in that show wasn't meant to play the same role as Carcetti's speech, but it does, unfortunately for the new Captain America. It's reflective of how people react to rousing, empty speeches and how easily we confuse words with substance. Not that I'm taking shots at Disney and Marvel, but obviously that's an easy and popular thing to do online for clicks. See what I did there? Easy and popular. Carcetti's arc, at least at the end of season 3, seems to foreshadow his downfall. Maybe not as a politician, but as a man. He's not a villain in the traditional sense, nor is anyone in The Wire a hero or a villain in the traditional sense. Everyone, I was about to say he's just this, but everyone is playing the game. He's just someone for whom playing the game seems inevitable, which I should have known and definitely probably did as far back as when he was cheating on his wife and staring in the mirror at himself. He's built to fall into those traps, but he's still arguably one of the most nuanced characters in the series for me. Not because we know exactly who he is, but because we don't. He's slippery, he's ambiguous. I am genuinely unsure about him. Is he a politician losing his way? Or has he been doomed from the start? He probably has been doomed from the start because he's a narcissistic man. Compromises will be made, like ultimately capitalizing on Bunny's demise for political points, even though it's not a complete condemnation of him. It's a gray area. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I think we're meant to compare Bunny Colvin and Thomas Carcetti's speeches. At the beginning of season 3, Bunny gives us the impassioned paper bag monologue, outlining flaws in the system and offering up a solution, risking his career to enact real change. Carcetti's not going to risk his career, although you could make the argument that Bunny didn't think he was risking his career at all. Also, that's not to say that Bunny was right, just that he tried to enact true change, to make a difference. And it genuinely seems like Carcetti gets that and respects Bunny in the wake of the scenes that they had together. And that might make Carcetti the most disappointing, dangerous, useless type of politician. I don't know. The type of politician who wants to do good, but is ultimately consumed by the compromises the system demands of him. The game demands of him. We see it all the time, from local mayors to presidents, a revolving door of speeches and other BS, followed by disappointing action or inaction. The thing that I love the most about The Wire in its first 3 seasons, and this is my interpretation, or this has been my experience, is that it doesn't offer clean answers, but it does ask the right questions. And I don't even want the show to outline solutions, even though it's definitely suggesting certain things. And maybe Carcetti as a character is the perfect cipher for the show's larger message about institutions, ambition, and failure. It's this mirror held up to the audience, irrespective of class or occupation. A reminder that even the smartest of us can be fooled, especially when we want to be.